If the two sides discuss, we are either facing two people who defend what they think is right, regardless of what we prove to be right between them, or we are facing a match in the debate in which each side tries to win even if it is convinced in its heart that it is wrong. If you are my friend, you have watched some talk shows, especially political ones, you will have witnessed the second type of discussion, or rather argumentation. In such programs, we find that the two parties, or at least one of them, try to prove that it is the unity of the right, resorting to the method of sterile or hypochondriac argument, where its goal is not to reach the truth, but to triumph for the soul, even if it is wrong, which is evidence of the weakness of the argument, the inability to persuade and fanaticism of opinion, and someone who is arguing here often relies on loudness, and does not believe in logic, facts, or facts. If he feels the power of the other's logic, he resorts to disguise and misleading methods based on concealment and misinformation, so he moves away from the subject of the conversation, and tries to do so in various ways, means and tricks. Most of these tricks come through evasive and verbal fallacies whereby the debate is tried to be resolved using inappropriate or vague words, such as ridicule, mockery, belittling the other party, and even lying in order to appear victorious. Even in our lives today, we have all seen such debates that very quickly turn into controversies. For example, you try to convince your friend or coworker that 1 + 1 is equal to 2 and put before him all the arguments and proofs that you know that prove it, but he lacks what supports his statement that 1 + 1 = 3. For example, he jumps into a personal matter that is completely out of the topic of discussion, such as reminding you that you are sometimes late for appointments, attacking your public taste, or trying to anger you by ridiculing or insulting. People sometimes don't win debates because their arguments are correct, but they change the subject or bully their competitors, in addition to 36 other tricks mentioned by the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer in his book The Art of Always Being Right. This book explains in Schopenhauer the models of arguments and fallacies that are used when arguing parties dispute. Each or both parties may seek to undermine their adversary by adopting various means of words and events, such as the use of a linguistic subterfuge by concealing the intention, the use of a false introduction, and other ways to make the person addressing pass his speech and make his argument ostensibly acceptable. In this summary, let's address all methods. The truth is that many of them are similar and lead to the same result, and these methods of attack are useful to know when used against us, and defensive methods with which we fortify ourselves when offensive methods are used against us. Schopenhauer, a German philosopher whose works did not receive much attention in his lifetime, but who left a great influence on various fields such as philosophy, literature, and science. Many thinkers and artists were influenced by his writings on ethics, psychology, and others. His influence on their works has been cited by many, including philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, psychologists such as Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, and great writers. Like Eliot and Steil, Schopenhauer argues that the quirks, and footsteps that people resort to in order to be right in the end, are so numerous and manifold, yet so recurring so regularly that a few years ago I made them the subject of private reflection, and drew attention to their official images. Research, having realized that despite the diversity of discussion topics and the people involved in it, the same neighborhood and similar quirks, always dating, and it was very easy to recognize. Schopenhauer begins his book by defining the basis of controversy as the art of quibbling as its way of making a person always appear to be right with what is legitimate or not, that is, by all available means. The invitation may be sincere in the eyes of its owner and wrong in the eyes of others. The owner may know that it is wrong and strive to pass it on or justify it for an end in himself. According to the author, while logic is related to objective truth, argumentation focuses on defending claims even though they may not be logical or true. While some of the methods he describes are unethical and manipulative, his goal, he says, is not to encourage their use, but to help readers become more aware of them, and more willing to recognize and confront them. For example, someone who defends the idea that seawater is blue, the argument on the subject is to show him that seawater has no color and color, it is only a reflection of the color of the atmosphere that absorbs the 7 colors of the spectrum. The color blue is no longer the argument against oneself. It is to prove that the idea contradicts the nature of things, or with the statements of the opponent himself. In the previous example, we show that if we add only a yellow color to the seawater, the color of the water will become yellow. Then we ask, depending on the color theory. When we mix the primary colors yellow and blue, which is the color of the sea, the resulting color will be green, but the result was yellow, by his own admission. The water of the sea, then, has no color, and it is not blue as the two methods argued, are 1,000 direct refutations that attack the call from its foundations, indicating that it is not sincere, since the attack is directed at the thesis or idea itself. Fab Luck indirectly attacks the call of its results, where the attack is directed to the results of the thesis. The fake person, O sons of pilgrims, during the discussion for the purposes of shading others in order to prove the validity of his point of view, so he wears his illogical opinion in Yaba, making him seem like he is logical. If you enter into a discussion with someone like him, you must be categorical in your questions, and do not let anything miss without exposing it. If he is evasive, and does not answer clear answers, it is better to interrupt the discussion with him, so as not to waste your time, or the matter reaches a personal debate. It unnecessarily exhausts your mind and may lead you to quarrel with him, but if you have to discuss with this person, you must know the 8 and 30 methods that Schopenhauer laid out in his book, so that you can fight these verbal battles. Schopenhauer begins it with extension, alliteration, generalization, etc., and they are similar in common in that the opponent actually talks about something else more than he talks about the proof provided for the idea under discussion, so the opponent extends our argument to the furthest point, analyzes it in the most complex possible general way and understands it in the broadest possible sense in order to be more vulnerable to attack from different angles. While he is reducing his arguments and proofs to the narrowest possible point, it is easy to take care of an apartment in a building on your own, but it is difficult to take care of a spacious palace surrounded by multi-gate pictures. For example, you are discussing the economic success of a country, and you say that the country is economically successful, but your opponent is trying to extend the matter to political, social, art and even mathematical aspects, the basic idea, in the sense of luring you into exaggerating your argument. And when you reach that exaggeration and diverge and eventually reach a departure from what you were trying to prove in the first place, your idea through the sea can exaggerate you, thus attacking the original case on which you were trying to base the argument. To counter this, you have to scrutinize the specific meaning that the opponent wants from the words they use. It may also apply a general principle to certain situations, thus making the argument seem more convincing by presenting a general principle as a solution to a particular problem without providing additional evidence or support. Here, a person has to wonder whether the general principle is applicable in this particular case and appropriate for it. It may be the opposite, i.e., generalizing rather than discussing details, focusing on general statements rather than going into details or specific facts. Your opponent may be shorthandic, which means choosing a particular point as the first and last proof of proving something untrue. There is an old joke about two Western students who do not understand the issue of logical sequence. One of them went to the professor asking him to explain it to the professor. "Do you have a dog?" "Yes," and the professor said, "So you have a spacious house, in which the heart lives, and you have an excess of food." The student said, "General." The professor added, "So, you have a lot of banquets and guests that result in this surplus," and the student agreed, and the professor said, "If your father is a generous man, and so the logical sequence produces a relationship between owning a dog's sleeve and the generosity of your parents." The stupid student went to his colleague, told him that he had finally understood it, and asked him, "Do you have a dog?" His colleague said no, and he replied, "Your father is a stingy man." Introductions to the discussion. The opponent may try to put you in a defensive position. If you are initially unable to prove your claim, he argues that it is false, so it is important to start the dialogue with a good and clear introduction, and avoid leaving any ambiguity or doubt until the opponent accepts your argument, but without revealing your position directly, but gradually revealing it through questions and hints, so that the opponent does not have enough information. The deception and falsification mentioned in the first 3 lives is practiced if the opponent uses false preludes for the sake of shading. His introductions can be used and discussed in the same way of his thinking to invalidate his arguments. Anger and distraction, and this is what the majority of people use. Here, the opponent will try to irritate Cap with different tactics and methods, provoking you and unfairly or oppressing you brazenly, or distracting you by annoying you emotionally through the target's use of provocative or emotionally charged topics, to divert your attention and lose your focus, and his goal is to make you behave irrationally. He can easily prove his point, and he may try to practice distraction to distract you from your argument by bringing up a secondary or irrelevant topic, so that you forget your argument, or get lost in an irrelevant topic that may try to anger you. Also, for example, to be careful to show extreme disregard for your certain conviction without trying to prove or refute this conviction. Only he will say a short sentence that holds precisely the opposite of your conviction. This sentence must be lined with indirect, but obvious rudeness. This is similar to personalization, where he shifts the focus of the discussion from pilgrims to you instead of refuting your arguments, trying to raise doubts about your credibility or motives, and even questioning your reputation, or focusing on your personality and behavior, or questioning your intelligence and competence, so you lose control of yourself, lose your ability to persuade, and you are in a weaker position, so you cannot present your arguments rationally. It turns into a position of defending yourself, and then distorts your arguments, or gives the impression that you don't have arguments at all, then controls the discussion and imposes his own point of view. You can never respond to this with any logical refutation, because it is a fallacy from its foundation, and instead of revolting and losing your mind and suffocating, and this is what your opponent wants, only. Don't be angry. That's the reality of what we see a lot. In political talk shows, in such discussions that are presented in front of an audience, the opponent tries to convince the audience and not the other party. Success in the debate depends on convincing the audience, not the private M. The goal is to attract the feelings of the audience and influence it to obtain its support, to be an argument for the party that succeeded in attracting it, who is convinced. The audience, or at least most of them, by their words, won the debate. Declare victory despite defeat. The opponent may give the impression that his arguments are strong, and that he won the discussion, while the opposite is what happened. His arguments were not convincing, and he actually lost the discussion, and this often succeeds if the opponent is the bold and confident type, and you are the shy type who does this by shifting the focus to non-essential aspects, and makes them look like strong arguments pretending to win, or making vague statements. You tolerate more than one interpretation, and then he confirms his victory by forcing you to a specific interpretation, or an opponent moves specific phrases or facts supporting arguments that he focuses on and repeats over and over again, to give the impression that his argument is stronger and more convincing than yours, while ignoring other information and facts that support your position, as he focuses only on what supports his position, and diverts attention from what contradicts his position. Or surprise you by ending the discussion by saying that your arguments are ridiculous, and not worth wasting time answering them, and gives the impression that he won the discussion even if his arguments are, and he may interrupt you as well, as he noticed that you have an argument that will allow you to defeat him in preventing you from ending your proof by immediately interrupting the discussion, changing its course, turning it into other issues, where he modifies the topic of the discussion, such as taking a word or phrase in your argument, and interpreting it differently to make a completely new meaning, and starting from there as a diverter of focus to another aspect of the topic, less useful to you, avoiding the main topic, or drag you into trivial discussions to confuse you, or confuse the audience, if any, distract them from a key topic, and divert focus from their weaknesses. Hidden attack. The opponent may seem at first agreeing with your arguments, acknowledging them, and then providing an exception, i.e. you have your argument completely, or shows that your argument is valid in some cases, but the idea under discussion is not one of them, and the opponent may sometimes push you to exaggerate in presenting your arguments, allowing him to reveal any weaknesses or contradictions in them, to use them against you to weaken your position. Sometimes the opponent resorts to trying to convince you or the public by trying to support his argument using the words or opinion of the money of a person with authority or status, especially if this authority has respect or prestige with you, or with the audience watching the argument, where the focus is on the authority of the person and not on the strength or validity of the argument itself or its approval of the subject. The opponent may attack your argument by placing you in a particular group, and then disdain that group with words that he or the public knows in advance that you or the public are covering, hating, or not understanding their exact meaning, such as saying that you are defending the bourgeoisie. These pragmatic statements, your ideas are reactionary. The adversary can also deliberately confuse or amaze you with a barrage of talk to the point of becoming unable to listen, think, and see. It uses technical, or complex terms that are difficult or impossible for the ordinary to understand, as well as giving successively that it is without a high level of experience and competence, which may also confuse. The adversary can also cite false or corrupt evidence to support his position by citing irrelevant, incorrect, or manipulated data or statistics, such as citing statistics and studies whose extent cannot be verified, and we really see this a lot everywhere. Sometimes the opponent agrees with your idea, and even endorses that it is only good to distort it or distort the decision made afterwards by saying that it is good in theory, but not viable or impossible. For example, you defend electric cars, that they are the future, how they preserve the environment, etc. The opponent agrees with everything you say. He then argues that the idea is difficult or impossible to achieve in most of the Arab world. If the discussion has an audience, the opponent may rely on addressing their interests instead of their minds, trying to arouse their personal feelings or interests, to exceed their rationality, their reasons, based on the premise that the audience is affected by emotions and personal interests more than by rational pilgrims, such as if a politician defends a controversial policy, indicating that although it is likely to negatively affect a small group, however, it is in the interest of the country, which is the general population of it, provoking people's feelings towards their homeland, without providing evidence that the decision is really in the interest of the homeland. Finally, My friend has mentioned in a hadith of the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, that he said, I am the leader of a house in the midst of paradise, for those who leave the mirror even if he is right, the leader of the system of the Lord of paradise, means the bottom of it, and hypocrisy is the argument. The argument often does not come well, and it is better for the person to leave it completely, unless he is compelled, and as we said in the introduction, some people are better to interrupt the discussion with them. In order not to waste your time, or the matter reaches a personal debate, which unnecessarily exhausts your mind, and may push you to quarrel with them, in the discussion the goal should be to reach the truth and make the right decision, instead of just trying to win and satisfy the ego and vanity.